Hi, I'm Varsha Mathur. I am a relationship and dating coach, and you're listening to Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing.
Yeah. My name is Abhay Dandekar, and I share conversations with talented and interesting individuals linked to the global Indian and South Asian community. It's informal and informative, adding insights to our evolving cultural expressions, where each person can proudly say, "Trust me, I know what I'm doing." So periodically on Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing, we share a spotlight conversation and feature brief chats with an individual from the community about a special topic or a unique endeavor. For this spotlight episode, it's really no secret that relationships, managing, exploring, sustaining, or exiting from them, it's all very, complex. They can be every adjective. They can span the spectrum of emotions. They can be fleeting or long-lasting, and of course, they evolve and develop with many multiplicities. So it was wonderful to connect with dating and relationship coach Varsha Mathur. Varsha has a background in law and mediation, and she's been guiding people through their relationship universes for the past 7 years, drawing from her own very personal journey through dating, marriage, divorce, and remarriage. Experiences that matter, given how pervasive and how challenging these all can sometimes be within our global South Asian and Indian backdrop. Varsha's authenticity and ability to both recognize and dissect areas that are sensitive while also helping individuals build confidence, ignite attraction, and build long-term partnerships have all helped her become an internationally sought-after expert. I guess every generation finds new ways of discovering each other, but with a bevy of online layers and in a world that's increasingly connected yet can sometimes feel so incredibly lonely, it was nice to share a chat with Varsha and get a sense of what it's like to have a coach on your side to help you feel like your best self. I'm not kidding. I really do feel like most everyone probably, given the nature of our digital age and navigating through relationships and again, really sort of building confidence for yourself, I really do feel like everyone needs to have you on speed dial at some point for themselves. So hopefully, more than anything, you're finding great comfort in what you do and the people that you meet.
I do, yeah, and thank you for saying that. It's really nice to be able to be someone who can jump into anybody's life and see how to support them and be there for them. And it's really something that supported me as well, coaching.
I've been reading a little bit about your backdrop and the number of experiences and achievements, and in many ways, even kind of disharmony that you've gone through. How did you find perhaps both peace and power in this reincarnation of coaching people with their relationships?
Yeah. Well, I think first and foremost, it's about hindsight is 2020. So definitely what I can say today is not how I felt going through the process of all sorts of career changes, all sorts of relationship changes. But at the end of the day, I've had a very supportive family and I have had the ability to finally just be okay with where I'm at and understanding that my journey is unique from other people. I have to really embrace all of the parts of who I am so that I can move forward in a way that supports me outside of societal pressures and things that I thought I was supposed to be doing.
I have a practical question for you. You hear words like coaching and mentoring and advising and guiding, navigating all the time, right? Are there
Right.
actual differences that you see when you're thinking a little bit about being a coach versus an advisor versus a mentor? How do you frame some of those?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite questions because unfortunately, the coaching space is not highly regulated in the US. And
Yeah.
so there are a lot of people calling themselves coaches, but maybe actually acting more like therapists or consultants.
Mm.
The difference being that therapy is really a space for healing and maybe there was some past trauma, things like that. There's also sometimes a diagnosis involved. And a consultant will come in and just give you black and white advice, tell you how to do it. It'll work as soon as you put it into place. But coaching is really something different, which is about looking at the client as whole and complete and ready to move forward and partnering them, standing side by side with them and saying, how do we get you from where you are now to where you want to be in the future? Yes, sometimes the past comes up, like in therapy, but
Right.
really looking at it as how do we put it aside so it's not affecting our future and our decision making. And with over 7 years of experience now, I definitely have tools and practices for clients to try out and practice, but it's never like a hard and fast homework or rule that
Mm.
I give people around what's going to actually work for them, because every relationship and every person is so different.
By the way, did that come as pretty naturally for you, or was
Absolutely
this
not.
a huge learning process? Because I can imagine that people who've been programmed with lots of consultants in their past
Yes.
certainly are patterning after what they've actually experienced themselves.
Absolutely. And so I started my practice really not being certified or trained by any particular means. And then
Yeah.
eventually got trained through the International Coach Federation, which does have ethical guidelines, core competencies involved. And so with that, you are trained to then take yourself off the court, really listen to the clients in a new way. Because my background was an eldest daughter in a South Asian family, having been through a divorce, having been through career changes, educational changes, all these things. So I wanted to tell people what has worked for me,
Yeah.
but that just is not actually in service of them. Finding a client to discover for themselves what works is the key.
What you're speaking to is, of course, that sweet spot of really discovering yourself and finding your own comfort zones. I'm curious how you think about this more than anything else. Can you only find your best comfort zone with people and even yourself to a degree by setting boundaries? And do those boundaries, just like it or not, they just move over time?
Mm-hmm. Well, it depends on who you are, whether boundaries are something you're used to already utilizing or not. For some people, boundaries are just a safety net. It's so far into their comfort zone that it's actually not supporting them to grow. And for
Yeah.
other people, their comfort zone is to have zero boundaries. And it's a safe space to always be giving and giving and giving. And then there's a huge spectrum as well. But in coaching, we often talk about how being outside of your comfort zone is where the real growth can happen, where the real possibilities lie. And so the opportunity is to say, how do I remain more authentic to who I am and show up to the world in a way where I really want to be the version of myself that I is the best version of myself, the
Yeah.
authentic version of myself, while all those things are triggering me, while I feel like I might need boundaries or I'm getting really pushed outside of my comfort zone.
I'm thinking of the athletic examples where, of course, a coach is in a way standing on the sidelines, watching you perform, and really doing a great job of observing and then maybe tweaking behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
And in your world, of course, I mean, you only are able to spend certain amounts of time with people that you're quote unquote coaching. How do you go about the observation part
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to coaching, and especially with relationships that are happening kind of asynchronously with how you're working with them?
Yeah, I think first and foremost is the trust piece. Knowing that when my client shows up to a call, we have developed a level of connection that allows me to know that what they're going to share with me is really what's happening in their life. And
Yeah.
ultimately, also knowing that whatever you bring to the table to the coaching conversation is for you. And
Right.
so, if there is something that you're not sharing or that is misaligned with what we're talking about and what you're practicing, I have no control over that. It's really, really just up to the client to bring that authenticity and honesty. But also, I do hear a lot of stories. And
Yeah.
for the most part, yes, I've heard all the stories.
I can only imagine. Right.
Yes. The idea is to really look at high level what's going on here,
Yeah.
because the circumstances of your life are usually not as important as what's really happening intellectually, emotionally, energetically, and that's going to make a shift regardless of the circumstances.
And yet everybody wants to make every aspect of their life an app. So, I mean, I'm grateful that you're not having people wear body cams and,
Right.
Google glasses and put on their VR glasses so that you can basically dissect and analyze every aspect of their relationships. And yet that's exactly what people want to do with all the other aspects of your life. So how do you kind
Yeah.
of integrate and thread that needle a little bit in 2024?
Right. And it's especially, I guess, somewhat problematic. I'm doing air quotes because
Right.
there's the dating apps,
Right.
and there's AI everywhere. And so definitely for singles that I work with, it can be very daunting, and it's taken a lot of the emotional connection out of their experience. And
Sure.
so even though I work via Zoom with clients from like all over, at the core of what we're talking about is that emotional, somewhat spiritual connection that they get to practice with me. And
Yeah.
they get to put down all the other fluff and distractions and actually have a conversation about that thing that they want to feel 20, 30 years from now with a partner or with their life in general. And that is, it's very grounding.
Mm.
It really does help to sweep away all of the noise that comes from technology and things like that.
Yeah, I mean it's so different to really filter out the signal from the noise, and having someone who has a deeper and richer and maybe again a macro perspective is helping people to do that so a little bit more seamlessly. There's It's not surprising, of course, and there's so much data to really look at this, that the majority of people are now making their first pass at meeting someone online digitally, and it makes, I think, guiding this very different in different spaces, right? Whether you're virtual, whether you're doing so on an app, if you're in a phone call or a video call, or if you're in person at a big giant conference or a big giant
Mm-hmm.
party, or one on one, or in a small group, even with someone. How do you build confidence for people to tackle any and perhaps all of these, even though
Mm-hmm.
they're so varied when it comes to how relationships both spark and develop and sustain?
Yeah. Great question. There's so many ways depending on what the needs are, of course, of the person. But the place I like to look first and foremost is the bigger why behind the thing that they want is often the best driver. And confidence off, there's so many layers to this. First and foremost, like putting down the societal pressures, right? So
Yeah.
that's kind of the first piece of it, is really recognizing, am I coming from that should and the thing I
Right.
think I'm supposed to be doing because my parents are like, looking at their clock saying you're beyond 30 now, so you got to be married. And then also looking at wanting a marriage, wanting a connection with your partner that is more than just the timeline, more than just, I need a little bit of companionship, but actually understanding what is it you're going to get? Is it safety, security, love, physical connection? And then once you begin to understand that, the confidence to move forward tends to evolve and start to sprout
Right.
because there's a real like angst about it. And unfortunately, if you're just doing it based off of a whim or I think this is right and it's my time, there's no motivation to get anywhere with the relationships and they tend to fizzle out.
I've been reading a lot, at least, of buzz about polyamorous relationships, and does everything in a way lead back to what degree of intimacy you are sharing with various people, whether they're romantic relationships or platonic friendships or professional relationships. Does everything lead back? I mean, in a way, we are in a parallel universe with each one of our relationships. So
Mm-hmm.
does everything relate back to the degree of intimacy you're offering of yourself and expecting of the other person?
It could be, absolutely. Yeah. The degree of intimacy is,
I just made that up, by the way. So I
yeah,
mean,
no, that's super cool that that just like came out. That's great. But, a place to look with like polyamorous relationships or just doing anything outside of the norm, even like the idea of like getting a divorce or maybe living with a partner and not being married. These are things that are really somewhat unfortunately new to the South Asian community, especially. And the place to look is, how comfortable am I with the gray areas of
mm,
life? How
yeah,
much can I mess up these definitions, recreate definitions for what I want and what I think is important? And then all sorts of new things can open up for you.
right,
And then there's the idea of enrolling your partner to say, hey, I see this. Do you see this with me? Can we
yeah.
bring someone else in? What do you see for yourself in it? And how much would it actually grow our relationship as opposed to shut it down and cause problems? Though, having that conversation around challenges is also really useful. But yeah, I think just that being willing to be messy is a
Yeah.
really cool place to start.
And I wonder, like, in general, whether you are at the beginning of a relationship, in the middle of a relationship, perhaps at the end of a relationship, or at least in a different spot in your relationship, this cycle of going from attraction to short-term development of a relationship, or cultivating that connection to the long-term relationship. Is the secret just basically finishing the loop on that cycle back to attraction?
Yeah, I mean, I always say that there are like three big things to constantly be thinking about in relationships. So attraction is definitely one of them. And attraction is both, what you're attracted to, what your partners, or even just the things that you're interested, what are they attracted to as well? And then how enrolling and alluring can you be towards one another in that sort of exchange? The
Yeah.
second piece is, of course, confidence, and both your confidence, how confident you can make someone else feel. And then the third piece is partnership. So you can have all of those things as an individual, but as soon as you start connecting the dots and bringing those three things together is when you really have something powerful with another human. And
Right.
every relationship's going to it's going to depend on what's missing.
Mm.
I've seen people who really just need to work on their like sex lives, essentially, rather than the partnership, because they're really good at running their life together.
Yeah.
And each of them are bringing confidence because they've got years together, but something has dwindled in their romantic life. And then goes the other way around. A lot of people
Sure.
meet partners who are, you've got that initial chemistry and there's that, even a couple one night stand kind of feeling, but how can you shift that into partnership to actually develop something more long-standing?
Yeah. I imagine that, it's sort of like this constant weave of how people are working both sides of that. And of course, then discovering new layers of roles that they play with each
Mm-hmm.
other, and how intimacy then, of course, factors into that, and confidence, as you mentioned. I'm curious, what's perhaps both liberating and, in fact, locking about being a South Asian American in doing this work?
I love to be a little bit of a rebel. I love to push boundaries and not play by the rule book. And
Hmm.
so by being able to have these conversations and by really feeling such a joy in the place that I've landed in my own life, knowing that I really broke a lot of rules along the way. And it doesn't mean you have to be that person, it doesn't mean you have to be rebellious, but to be able to work with people and say, what if we didn't have this rule book? I
Right.
love that. It's great. It's a lot of fun. It's very eye opening. And there's nothing wrong with the rule book,
Of
but
course.
also it's super fun to play outside.
Yeah. And do those who perhaps really, I wouldn't say abide by those rules, but perhaps feel like they have to be governed by those rules because they have that South Asian American or Indian American or Pakistani American backdrop, what kind of liberation, perhaps, looking outside that comfort zone, or even looking outside the walls of what how do you help people get there? And
Yeah.
perhaps when you work with people who don't necessarily want to go outside of those rules, or those
Mm-hmm.
boundaries,
Right.
is that where the kind of, again, the balance between liberation and being locked actually
Mm-hmm.
works?
Well, yes, absolutely. Because most people don't want to break the rules. Most people want to say, like, the one thing I hear the most is, I really want to make my parents proud. I want them to be happy
Yeah.
and proud of me. And so redefining what things like joy, respect, connection, family, redefining those things to actually be aligned with something that can stand the test of time for yourself,
Mm.
that is super important, because you can find that liberation and that joy within the parameters of what your family has always been emphasizing and placing upon you,
Right.
but without being willing to see it as something other than a trap or a rule, it can be very limiting. So I often encourage people to, like, let's just start with a blank slate and then see how that joy can really fit into the life that you see and that your family sees for you.
You spent a lot of time as a lawyer and gained, of course, so many professional skills that way. But I'm curious about this. What did being a lawyer teach you about helping people, in fact, strive to cultivate intimacy
Mm.
and really learn about unlocking their potential in relationships?
Ooh. So, as a lawyer, I think the biggest thing for me has been the ethical piece of it, confidentiality and trust.
Mm,
I was also a mediator during my law years. And for me, that has been a huge skill set for working with couples, especially
right.
couples who want to stay together and find a meaningful way to do so. And the confidence that it's given me to know that I can get through the bar exam, I can get through, really difficult things and train myself to be there for other people is really rewarding. The more I fill my cup, the more I can be there for clients. And I think the other piece also is that, I say I'm a rebel, but I did everything my parents told me to, right? I became
Right.
that lawyer. I did all the things that, I joke with my husband now that, my grandfather would always laugh that my first partner, my first husband was not a doctor, but my second husband was. And that was always what my grandparents wanted for me, right? Is marry the Indian doctor, the Hindu doctor. And
Yeah.
so, as much as I say I'm the rebel, I'm the religious daughter in law to the parents of my Indian doctor husband. And so,
Right.
it's kind of like this really interesting dynamic to balance, but also to see that there's so much that can be available even within a traditional lifestyle.
Yeah, and I mean, when people think of lawyers, they certainly think that they have that you build a professional trust. It's a confidential experience, it's a professional experience. And yet, the subject matter of what you're talking about really is quite gray, and it
Mm-hmm.
evolves and it changes, and it's really not very black and white and cut and dry. So, did you have to, in fact, maybe do some unlearning about your professional skills in order to enter and really succeed in this space?
That yes, the quick answer is yes.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because as cut and dry as law can be, as a coach, my rules are the same. I
Yeah.
still have, a certain set of competencies and guidelines that I use for my profession that I brought back in once I was properly trained. And I do encourage people to look at the training of their coaches to know that they're working on a professional level.
Yeah.
But when it comes to seeing the gray areas, that to me is about abundance versus scarcity and really being willing to look at outside of your comfort zone stuff. Those were all personal development things.
Hmm.
And as a lawyer, probably without definition, those things were happening as I was going through my journey of law school and working in a firm and things like that. But now I actually have the language to give that gray stuff.
Yep.
So it's almost a way to delineate it. It's a way to codify the gray, to have the language available, which is really great. And my husband actually took the same coaching course just on my request because it gives us the same language to use in our
Yeah.
relationship, and those same tools that I work with my clients on are I'm going to use for the rest of my life.
Yeah, of course. I mean, a lot of times it just helps to have a playbook that guides you a little bit. I feel like a lot of your work is signatory to the title of this show. Trust me, I know what I'm doing. And when you are actually interfacing now with those with our kind of common and global sort of cultural background, when you particularly work with Indian or South Asian clients, what's perhaps the most common thread, particularly when it comes to surprising discoveries that people make about themselves in working with you? Yeah.
Oh, great question. It's hard to put words to it,
Yeah.
but there is this growth that happens, those aha moments that are related to defining themselves for themselves. I think
Mm,
that's probably the most common thread is I am something more than, and I am not disaligning myself or misaligning myself with my culture to find this individuality, but discovering individuality and the joy that comes from really being strong in your decisions, that I really enjoy seeing clients discover.
Are you seeing any variation with that, by the way, when it comes to generations and the age group, or the idea of whether someone is born and brought up here or they're immigrants from South Asia itself?
Yeah, there are all the variables. There's so many things.
Yeah.
I've also worked with newly widowed or older divorced
Yeah.
individuals who were arranged marriage and then now are back in like the shadi.com like dating field.
Yeah.
And it's super interesting to see them discover the same things. And there's just such a spectrum in the South Asian diaspora, especially of where people are with how traditional they are, how modern, how the education level can make a difference. There's just so many things. So I see the whole spectrum for sure.
Well, certainly helping people find themselves and find hopefully what their peace is and comfort is with others, particularly. I know people are seeking you out. Varsha, thank you so much for joining us. This was really quite an interesting and a treat of a conversation. I'm so glad that we were able to visit with you, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you so much for having me and for doing the work you do.
Thanks again, Varsha. And please check out more at coachingbyvarsha.com. Thanks again for listening, and wherever you might be finding this, please don't forget to offer a kind rating or review or a comment about "Trust me, I know what I'm doing," and pass it along to your friends and family. And if you haven't noticed, it's pretty simple. We're all connected and we're all human. Let's try and remember that every day. Till next time, I'm Abhay Dandekar.